then. The United States had accumulated a national debt of nearly $33 trillion by early September 2023. And back at the end of July 2023, the debt had actually been slightly lower, with gross federal debt standing at $32.6 trillion, while $25.7 trillion was debt held by the public. Now, before discussing the big debt problem of the US, it's essential to understand that what we commonly refer to as the national debt is essentially an elaborate accounting ledger. It's a factoring term that tracks the net amount of money the government has injected into the broader economy after accounting for the funds it's collected from the public through various means, primarily taxation. Also, we must understand that the idea of striving for a national debt of precisely zero is unnecessary and impractical for any nation. Debt serves various important purposes, particularly in addressing unforeseen emergencies, essential and non-essential expenses, and it's a can't-do-without aspect of national economies. With these in mind, it's been a shocking development to realise that the national debt of the US has notably surged since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. As seen in this report, from 1980 to 2019, the federal debt increased at an annual average rate of 5.6%. In 2020, it increased 18% compared with the year before, as federal COVID-19 spending peaked. Now, given that the pandemic was a global emergency that set off a ton of debt cycles amongst countries around the world, that's understandable. However, there continues to be an increasing expansion of the US's national debt, and numerous economists and politicians have cautioned against it, saying that the continuous expansion of the national debt could have adverse effects on the economy. In evaluating the sustainability of the debt, these economists have considered factors like the prevailing interest rates and the rate of economic growth. To them, if the economic growth rate outpaces the interest rate, the debt becomes more manageable. Also, they believe the United States possesses the necessary resources to gradually reduce the debt or at least halt its relentless increase, but achieving this will require decisive political action. As mentioned before, the majority of US debt is held by the public in the form of government securities, such as treasury bonds, notes and bills, and when the government borrows, it does so by issuing bonds, which are essentially financial instruments specifying the amount owed and the terms of interest payment and repayment. Now, using this approach allows the government to convert a portion of the currency it has injected into the economy into a distinct type of US dollar, represented by government securities. The US dollar is already considered the world's reserve currency, making US government bonds an attractive and secure investment. Also, historically, public debt has always been employed as a financial tool, particularly in times of emergency, since borrowing is more favourable than burdening the current generation with excessive taxes. However, despite the various benefits we see this approach bringing about, a concern arises when debt is consistently accumulated for immediate consumption without yielding long-term benefits. In such cases, the financial well-being of future generations may be compromised, mirroring the broader trend of excessive borrowing rather than prudent financial planning. One important metric in this context is the debt to GDP ratio, which represents the debt relative to the size of the economy. The US is currently nearing a 100% debt to GDP ratio, while conventional stability benchmarks operate around 77%. The critical aspect of this ratio is its capacity to illustrate the government's ability to manage its debt effectively, especially the ability to service the debt, which involves repaying the principal and the associated interest to the lenders. In this same context, interest rates also play a significant role, as higher rates result in increased net interest payments. With that in mind, it follows that the Federal Reserve's actions, such as raising interest rates to slow economic activity, can substantially impact the cost of servicing the debt. In 2022, for instance, the federal government paid approximately $475 billion in interest on the national debt, equivalent to nearly 2% of GDP. Rising interest rates, however, notably benefited bondholders during that period, resulting in substantial additional income for them and a showcase of the fact that debt, when used strategically, can be an asset to the economy. It can be an extra source of income, enable substantial initiatives like infrastructure projects and crisis responses, such as managing the COVID-19 pandemic. However, when working with debt, maintaining a prudent balance between costs and benefits for future generations is also vital, especially considering that public debt essentially becomes a legacy passed on to subsequent citizens. This is why many economists have also posited that despite being the wealthiest nation globally, the United States continually borrows funds from the future. However, some economists, on the other hand, have determined it crucial as well to dispel the misconception that the national debt inherently burdens present and future generations. To them, understanding that the government's budget operates differently from a household budget is key, as it does not necessarily lead to an unsustainable financial predicament in the future. The United States shares the burden of debt with 15 other countries, including Japan, which holds the world's highest debt-to-GDP ratio. And economist Stephanie Kelton has highlighted Japan's case to challenge the conventional belief that debt is highly detrimental. Within the context of Japan, we see that the country has sustained fiscal deficits for the past 3 decades without experiencing inflation, surging interest rates, or solvency crises. In fact, in contrast to the mainstream economic predictions, Japan's experience actually contradicts the anticipated consequences of persistent deficits and rising debt. Japan has not encountered any debt defaults or crises, primarily because they've benefited from low borrowing rates, and even though the country has been burdened with substantial public debt, there's still recorded growth in their economy, slow as it may be. In the United States, on the other hand, the national debt often grabs headlines alongside terms like default and debt ceiling, even though default occurs only when the government fails to make a promised payment. The US, along with Denmark, is also one of the only 2 countries with a debt ceiling. However, Denmark's debt ceiling is set at a level that makes debt rarely become an issue for them. But in the US, the debt ceiling is a self-imposed restriction put in place by Congress. It compels the executive branch to spend authorized funds, but also restricts the issuance of specific securities required for payments, creating a challenging situation for the government to fulfill its authorized spending. This is a problem that has caused a massive debate over the debt ceiling, which economists believe can have severe repercussions for the US and global economy. As of December 2022, foreign governments and investors held approximately $7.4 trillion of debt, accounting for 30% of publicly held debt. However, in the present time, we've seen these foreign governments start to question the safety of these debts, and as we know, concerns always arise when countries holding US debt begin to question its safety, potentially leading to a sell-off. This situation is almost similar to a banking crisis, where a loss of confidence triggers a rush to withdraw funds. When a debt crisis looms, foreign investors may sell US treasuries if they perceive a lack of consensus on US fiscal policies, a continual rise in the debt-to-GDP ratio, and a gradual increase in interest rates, making it more challenging for the US to service its existing debt. In essence, the US national debt is unlikely to be fully repaid in the near future. While there is a broad agreement on deficit reduction in theory, the practical challenges emerge when people oppose spending cuts that affect them personally and favour tax increases that impact them less directly. The trajectory of debt is a cause for concern, but not an imminent crisis, and some even argue that the pressing issues facing the nation can actually justify taking on even more debt. Alright then, that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, share this video and press that post notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. We analyse the latest trending economic news, so watch out, and until next time, take care.